Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on our own minds to figure out the hidden mechanics behind our automatic reactions. You know, those gut feelings, those sudden fears, and those instant responses that feel like they just happen to us. I mean, have you ever really thought about that? Why a car backfiring can make your heart pound? Or why the smell of something from your childhood can instantly make you happy? Well, today, we're going to dive into all of it by exploring the fascinating world of reflexes, both the ones we're born with and, even more importantly, the ones our brains learn along the way. Okay, so to get started, we first need to understand the absolute basics. We're talking about reflex behaviors. These are the automatic, foundational responses that we don't consciously control. They are literally the building blocks for everything else we're going to talk about. So what is a reflex? It's any response that happens automatically whenever a specific trigger or stimulus is around. You don't think about it, you don't decide to do it. Just think about jumping at a loud, unexpected noise. That jolt, that's an innate reflex. It just happens. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even these built-in, kind of hardwired reflexes, they aren't set in stone, not at all. Our brains are constantly updating them, making them stronger or weaker based on our experiences and our environment. This change happens in two key ways that are basically polar opposites. First, you've got habituation. This is when you're exposed to something over and over, and your reaction gets weaker. It's why if you live near train tracks, you eventually just stop hearing the whistle. On the flip side, you have sensitization. This is when a single, really intense event makes you more reactive. So someone who's been through a traumatic event might startle at even quiet, normal sounds. Their system has become sensitized. Okay, so that brings us to a huge moment in psychology, the discovery of how we can learn totally new reflexes. And this story, well, it's a classic for a reason. It starts with a famous scientist, a few dogs, and the sound of a bell. So the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov wasn't even trying to study learning. He was actually researching the digestive system in dogs. But he noticed this really peculiar thing. The dogs would start salivating not just when they got their food, but when they heard the footsteps of the lab assistant who brought it. He realized he had just stumbled onto something huge. The dogs were learning to associate other signals with mealtime. So he designed this brilliant experiment that broke the whole learning process down into three clear stages. First, before any conditioning, the food naturally made the dogs salivate, but a neutral sound like a bell, it did absolutely nothing. Then, during the conditioning phase, he would ring that bell right before giving them food, over and over again. And finally, after repeating this pairing enough times, the sound of the bell all by itself was enough to make the dogs start drooling. And boom, a new reflex was born. Now, to really get this, there are four key terms we gotta know. The food is the unconditioned stimulus. It just naturally causes a reaction. The drooling in response to the food is the unconditioned response. The bell starts out as neutral, but through all that pairing, it becomes the conditioned stimulus, and it's now able to trigger the new conditioned response, salivating just to the sound of the bell. The brain literally created a brand new connection. Okay, so drooling dogs. We get it, a physical reflex can be learned. But what about something way more complex? What about human emotions? Can our fears, our anxieties, our phobias, can they be learned in the exact same way? Well, a psychologist named John B. Watson was absolutely convinced they could. He took Pavlov's ideas and set out to prove that our deepest emotional responses aren't some big mystery. They're actually conditioned by our environment. And to prove it, he conducted a now infamous, and yeah, pretty controversial experiment with a 9-month-old baby known as little Albert. The setup was pretty simple, really. Initially, they showed Albert a white rat, and he wasn't scared of it at all. He was actually curious. But then, every single time Albert reached for the rat, the experimenters would slam a hammer into a steel bar right behind his head, making this awful, loud noise that naturally made him cry. After pairing the rat with that terrifying noise just a few times, all it took was for Albert to see the white rat, and he would burst into tears. Now, I have to say, an experiment like this would be considered completely and totally unethical today, but it proved a really powerful point about how fear is learned. A previously neutral, fuzzy animal was now a trigger for intense fear. But it didn't stop there. And this is what's so wild. This new fear started to spread, which is a concept called generalization. Albert's fear didn't just stay with the rat. It started spreading to other similar, furry, white things. He became afraid of a white coat, a Santa Claus beard, and other furry objects. and the fear was strongest for the things that looked the most like the original rat. This is what's known as a gradient of generalization. Okay, I know this all might sound a bit depressing, right? Like we're just puppets of our past experiences. But here's the hopeful part. The best part, really. The same exact principles that our brains use to create these learned fears also give us the tools we need to take them apart. What can be learned can also be unlearned. The most direct method for this is a process called extinction. It's basically about unpairing that old association. So in little Albert's case, it would have meant showing him the white rat again and again, but without the loud, scary noise. Over time, his brain would learn that the rat is no longer a predictor of something awful, and that fear response would gradually just fade away. Another really powerful tool is counter-conditioning. Now, this one's more active. Instead of just removing the negative thing, you actually introduce a new positive one. The whole goal is to overwrite the old fear-based association with a new calming one. So if public speaking makes you anxious, you could practice pairing it with deep breathing exercises or calming music, teaching your nervous system to associate that situation with relaxation instead of panic. And for those really deep-seated fears, true phobias, there's a highly effective technique called desensitization. It's all about taking it slow, like taking baby steps. Instead of facing the fear head-on, you start with something much less intense, like maybe just a picture of what you're afraid of. Once you're okay with that, you move up a step, maybe to a toy version. By gradually and safely increasing the exposure, you let that fear response diminish without ever letting it get overwhelming. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's actually incredibly empowering. Understanding these principles shows us that so many of our fears, our anxieties, and our automatic negative reactions, they aren't permanent parts of who we are. They are learned patterns. And because they were learned, that means that with awareness, with patience, and with the right approach, they can be rewired.